Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Bro, as you can see, we back with something a little different today. Smithville, the strongest tornado in recorded history. YouTube been tripping with the views lately, so as always, make sure you like and subscribe. Comment what I should watch next, and let's get to this video, man.
April 27th, 2011. Sirens are blaring across a small town in rural Mississippi as residents make their way to a local storm shelter. Cramming inside, the screams of the sirens begin to fade as a terrible roar gets louder and louder, drowning out the sounds of their panicked breaths as the ground begins to tremble. The strongest tornado in U.S. history has just entered their town.
Let's get started.
It's late April, and meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center are scanning the atmosphere, looking for key ingredients needed for the formation of severe weather when they notice something concerning. A massive region of low pressure, called a trough, is moving across the United States. This giant, slow-moving trough is bringing with it a belt of extremely fast-moving winds aloft, while at the same time drawing in inconceivable amounts of warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico, bringing together a dangerous combination of atmospheric conditions.
So, I'm from the Midwest, and this is exactly what they tell you as a kid, but this is how they tell you tornadoes made. When it's hot air and it's cold air and it's mixing all together, tornadoes happen. So usually you see it in like transition periods, you know, when it's finna go from hot to cold or cold to hot, something like that. Tornadoes can be devastating, which is why I'm so interested in this video, man. Let's continue onward.
Mixture of warm, moist air with cold, dry air aloft is generating large amounts of atmospheric instability needed for thunderstorms called convective available potential energy, or CAPE. Additionally, the fast-moving southwesterly winds of the trough are overspreading a powerful, low-level jet of air rushing north, creating incredibly large amounts of both speed and directional wind shear needed to cause thunderstorms to begin rotating. Noting that all the ingredients for severe weather are now in place, the Storm Prediction Center issues a rare, high-risk outlook for severe weather, including a 30% outlook for strong tornadoes. By 1 a.m., a tornado outbreak was already underway across Mississippi and Alabama as unexpected lines of powerful thunderstorms called quasi-linear convective systems, or QLCS, moved across the area, spawning over 70 powerful tornadoes along with strong straight-line winds, causing widespread damage to infrastructure, while also leaving behind a dangerous thermal boundary draped across northern Alabama and Mississippi. As bad as things were, they were only going to get worse.
And then another crazy thing about tornadoes is this. When it's 70 tornadoes spread around your area, all you can do is go somewhere and do this. Bro, and hope it don't hit you. It'll pick your whole house up. There's nowhere really safe. You know what I'm saying? You just want to get under something sturdy and hope it don't hit you. Bro, it's really crazy. Onward.
As the sun begins to heat up the atmosphere on April 27th, meteorologists noticed that the storm system was even stronger than expected, prompting them to increase their outlook to an unbelievable 45% risk, noting, a major outbreak of intense, long-track, and perhaps violent tornadoes is expected. However, none of them could have imagined the scale of what was about to take place. At 10:30 a.m., a cluster of storms erupts near Monroe, Louisiana, slowly gaining strength before merging together, organizing into a powerful, rotating thunderstorm called a supercell, spinning faster and faster as the clouds begin reaching towards the ground. Just after 3 p.m., an ominous-looking funnel hovers above the ground and within seconds reaches the surface. The newly formed tornado initially causes only weak damage as it tracks to the northeast, bringing down patches of trees and causing light damage to rural structures. However, just 1 minute later, the tornado rapidly intensifies, completely destroying a couple mobile homes and scattering the debris long distances. The strengthening tornado continues to cause intense damage to rural structures, flattening large swaths of forest as it races to the northeast at over 60 miles per hour. It's at this moment that multiple people begin recording the tornado for the first time as it approaches the small towns of Anchor and Dixieland. One of these residents, Jay Rogue, films the tornado as it approaches his location. With the roar of the approaching tornado only getting louder, the family decides to move out of the tornado's way. When they return, there's little remaining of their home. After sweeping away many homes at EF3 strength, the tornado races off to the northeast, leaving behind a visible scar in the ground. But unbeknownst to those in its path, the true power of the monster had yet to be unleashed.
That's crazy, bro. Do y'all understand how wide this is? This is clearing all this land out. There's nothing that can stop it until it dissipates. That's absolutely insane, bro. Onward.
Inflicted in less than 2 seconds. At the same moment, local resident Greg Lambert takes a photo of the tornado, revealing the monster wedge as it passes just to his north. 4 miles away on Highway 45 alternate, 55-year-old Lynn Davis is driving south in his white pickup truck on his way to help his friend Tim, who suffered damage from a tornado earlier that day. While on the phone with Tim, Lynn begins to notice something strange approaching over the trees and utters a chilling phrase. "That looks like a tornado," before the phone call suddenly ends. A semi-truck driver driving directly behind Lynn watches in horror as Lynn's vehicle is peeled off the roadway by the ferocious winds of the tornado. Soaring hundreds of feet into the air, Lynn and his truck begin to orbit around the violent winds of the twister, trapped inside the tornado's grip in a cruel balance of forces as it begins to close in on the small community of Chapel Grove. Crashing into the community at peak strength, the tornado inflicts incredible damage to several well-constructed brick homes,
Did he live?
completely sweeping them off their foundations, causing intense vegetation damage and scouring the ground. As the tornado moves past town, however, it suddenly begins to weaken, breaking the delicate balance of forces that have trapped Lynn Davis and his truck mid-air. And suddenly, Lynn comes crashing back to Earth, sadly killing him on impact. Lynn Davis's truck had flown an unbelievable 1.7 miles through the air before finally landing near the foundation of one of the destroyed homes, the furthest distance a vehicle has ever been thrown by a tornado.
Wow.
Over the next 10 miles, the tornado destroys several homes near the town of New Wren before finally dissipating at 3:39 p.m. just north of the city of Amory, Mississippi, claiming the lives of 4 people. However, something far stronger was brewing. As the first tornado begins to weaken, the parent supercell continues to track to the northeast.
Let me remind you, they said 70. We just seen like 2 and how devastating they can be. They said it was like 70 of these around this area. And that's not even the big one that we here for. Stay focused. It's only going to get worse. Onward.
Closer and closer to the dangerous thermal boundary left by storms earlier in the day. Near the boundary, saturated air and backed winds will lower the storm's base closer to the ground and increase the already incredibly high low-level wind shear, turning an already historic atmosphere into what is possibly the most extreme tornadic environment ever recorded. If the supercell could tap into this environment, a tornado of unimaginable power would be released, and at 3:40 p.m., that's exactly what happened. Sirens begin to scream as the supercell merges with a smaller storm to its south, developing a new area of powerful rotation just to the north of the dissipating tornado. While this is happening, 2 amateur storm chasers, Camille Collins and Ashley Hurley, go outside to get a better look at the intensifying storm and begin recording the clouds. Within just a few seconds.
I don't understand people's fascinations with chasing storms either. What's so, at least scoot back a couple miles. Why you gotta be right up on it? You know what I'm saying? And every once in a while, some of them die, and then they be like, damn, that's sad. But
seconds, the 2 begin to notice a strange-looking cloud passing directly to their northwest that begins rotating incredibly quickly. Moments later, a funnel lowers towards the ground. Hovering just above the surface, the tornado starts its life as a relatively weak vortex, doing little more than snapping trees as it moves along the Tom Bigby waterway, but this weak phase is short-lived. The tornado's condensation funnel suddenly reaches the ground and explodes in intensity, drilling a narrow but incredibly intense swath of damage, removing several inches of grass and soil from the surface. At the same time, the now violent tornado crashes into a forest, flattening every single tree in its path, stripping them of their bark. It's at this moment, however, that something unexpected happens. As the tornado passes through the forest, its core suddenly collapses. Ripped apart by the intense wind shear, the tornado struggles, only inflicting minor damage to trees and low-lying vegetation as it races to the northeast. For a brief moment, it appears as if the residents in the storm's path have just dodged a bullet, avoiding the worst of the storm's wrath. However, this lapse in strength isn't going to last long. Just as fast as it weakened, the tornado strikes a delicate balance between the powerful wind shear trying to tear it apart and the unstoppable power of the storm's updraft trying to keep it together, and a tornadic core of incredible power crashes to Earth. Instantly, all the trees and vegetation surrounding the vortex are flattened and debarked as the core accelerates from EF1 to EF5 intensity in less than 6 seconds. At the same time, the winds inside the vortex become so strong and the pressure drops so violently that the ground begins to literally explode outwards, digging a trench in the ground over a foot deep and 170 yards long. Unbelievably, due to the tornadic core's fast-forward speed and relatively small size, this incredible feat of damage is inflicted in less than half a second. Racing to the northeast at a brutal 63 miles per hour, the tornado begins to set its sights on the small town of Smithville, Mississippi. 3/4 of a mile to the northeast, Tim Nix, along with several others, are frantically descending down the opening of a storm shelter when they catch a glimpse of the whirling gray mass racing directly at them.
Get in.
With just seconds to spare, Tim takes a photo of the approaching tornado before closing the door to the shelter behind him. Rapidly expanding and growing stronger with every second that passes, the tornado impacts the intersection of Davis Road and Highway 25, deeply scouring the ground and completely sweeping away 2 mobile homes as well as a bed and breakfast, granulating the debris into tiny pieces and scattering what was left long distances downwind. 3 people are thrown into the air as their homes disintegrate around them, 2 of which, a mother and daughter, are thrown into a nearby culvert and miraculously survive despite major injuries. The third, however, thrown from the bed and breakfast, is sadly killed, becoming the first person to lose their life to the tornado. At the same location, 3 vehicles stood parked near the bed and breakfast, a large RV and 2 semi-trucks. As the core passes, all 3 vehicles soar into the air despite weighing tens of thousands of pounds each. Flying for hundreds of yards, the RV and one of the semi-trucks come crashing to Earth, deeply embedding themselves into the ground as unrecognizable husks of scrap metal.
Y'all understand how
The
powerful
second
that is, right? Y'all know how big a semi-truck is. Y'all be scared to drive next to it. So just imagine that looking like a flattened Coke can, bro. That's the type of power we talking about. That's the type of devastation we looking at here. This is crazy. And it's really wild. You'll never get the perspective until you see it in person, bro.
Truck.
And hopefully you never have to see it in person.
One of its cargo of 5 65 steel pipes, however, disappears into the tornado and is never seen again, ripped to pieces by the violent winds. Half a mile to the northwest, employees working at the Glover Wilkins Lock and Dam begin to film what they are seeing.
There. Man, that's just to the east of us.
Man, you gotta see this debris up in there.
The employees watch as the funnel morphs into a large wedge shape, moving incredibly quickly and centrifuging debris in all directions. The tornado has gone from a stout cone to a massive wedge in just 23 seconds. At the same time, 85-year-old Jesse Cox is sheltering in his home when the core overtakes him. The decades-old home is no match for the ferocious winds of the core and is completely swept away, with the debris granulated into tiny pieces, sadly resulting in the death of Jesse. The destruction had been so violent that the concrete foundation itself was lifted, chipped, and partially dislodged, along with completely shredding and debarking all vegetation nearby. Continuing to deeply scour the ground, the tornado begins to enter the main part of Smithville and encounters home after home, pulverizing each one in its path and claiming another life. Just ahead on Highway 25, Jimmy Cowley attempts to race ahead of the tornado in his truck, but realizes he isn't going to make it. Jimmy turns into a driveway as his windows implode around him. His vehicle is lifted into the air and tumbles as if it were made of plastic before crashing back onto the road. Miraculously, Jimmy survives despite receiving a severe laceration to his head from flying debris. However, many of those around him are not as fortunate. 3 more would lose their lives here as their homes are wiped away around them. At one of the destroyed homes, a red Ford Explorer SUV disappears into the vortex, becoming a deadly missile as it flies through the air. As the power within the tornado grows stronger, the compact but extremely violent core begins to inflict extreme feats of damage, completely sweeping away homes, throwing vehicles into unrecognizable balls of metal, and creating such a strong suction effect that curtains in nearby homes are sucked up between the ceiling and walls. Some of the most impressive damage, however.
You understand what we just seen, bro? Go back and look at
Come
what you
from
just
the
seen.
large trees growing along Highway 25. These trees, weighing several tons each, were not only completely debarked and denuded, but were violently ripped out of the ground and granulated into wooden splinters, leaving nothing behind but dirt-filled craters lining the road. More and more debris begins to fill the air, becoming deadly shrapnel to anything unlucky enough to be caught in its path. Homes, trees, and businesses alike all become sandblasted by these deadly high-speed projectiles as the storm barrels through town. Crossing over Main Street, a manhole cover and its steel ring are ripped away, leaving behind a bare concrete hole while the Ford Explorer continues to soar overhead. Half a mile to the east, a security camera at the Smithville Police Department captures the outer edge of the tornado as objects fly across the screen before the video suddenly cuts out. 3 more large, well-built homes are obliterated along Main Street, mutilating trees, scouring the driveways, ripping the plumbing out of the ground, sweeping the foundations clean, and scattering the fragments hundreds of yards away, claiming another life. Scattered across town, numerous people scramble underground or to whatever shelter they can find in the few seconds they have left. The ground began to shake as a deafening roar grew louder and louder. One survivor described the sound as if a giant hammer was pounding the ground over and over again, like a sonic boom that repeats itself. Crashing into a row of mobile homes, the tornado claims another life as it closes in on the Pearson family home where Carla Jones is babysitting 3 children. With the deafening roar of the tornado quickly approaching and not enough time to make it to a shelter, Carla rushes the kids into the home's bathtub and lays on top of them in an effort to shield the children from the worst of the storm. Despite going to the safest place possible in the large 2-story home, no structure is capable of surviving what's coming. The entire home is torn down to the concrete foundation. Incredibly, the home's anchor bolts are ripped up and swept away, leaving nothing behind but a clean slab and completely debarked trees. The 3 children disappear into the vortex and are found 100 yards away on a nearby baseball field, severely injured but somehow still alive. Carla, however, is killed. She was only 37 years old at the time and gave her life to save the 3 children.
W. Carla, man.
Simultaneously, the red Ford Explorer that was picked up half a mile earlier along Highway 25 slams into the Smithville Water Tower, colliding with such extreme force it leaves a large 6-inch deep dent into the structure's solid steel frame before bouncing off and disappearing back into the tornado's grip. Spotting the whirling gray mass just seconds before impact, Michelle Wardlaw and her grandmother run across Elm Street for the nearest storm shelter, unable to hear or speak to each other over the deafening roar. They watch in awe as cars, trees, and pieces of houses fly above.
Why would you take your grandma outside, bro, and it's a tornado? Why did grandma cross the road? This is not what they meant, bro. Horrible timing. Oh, bro.
Their heads. Michelle and her grandmother are swept off their feet by the ferocious winds of the twister, but in an incredible stroke of luck, land inside the doors of the storm shelter, sparing their lives. Their neighbors, however, would not be so fortunate. As the tornado crosses into the town's eastern subdivision, it reaches its maximum intensity, inflicting tornado damage so extreme it seems inconceivable. Deep, extreme ground scouring carves into the surface as half a dozen large, well-built, multi-story homes are wiped off the face of the earth as if they had never existed. The tornado destroys the homes so violently that the debris was granulated into tiny, unrecognizable pieces. Not even a road is able to survive the terrible winds as the tar surface peels away into neatly compacted rolls. Of the 8 people in this area who didn't make it to an underground shelter, not a single one would survive.
Wow.
Like a knife carving into the landscape, the tornado crosses Monroe Street and reaches the Smithville Cemetery and Funeral Home. Gravestones are ripped apart and lofted as the entire brick funeral home is granulated so violently that the bricks turn into a fine powder. The only things remaining on the property are a bare concrete slab and craters where trees had once stood. Alongside the destroyed funeral home, a red husk of steel lay in a ditch among the debris and debarked vegetation. Unbelievably, this ball of steel was the red SUV picked up along Highway 25 that impacted the Smithville Water Tower. The truck had completed a mile-long journey through the air before finally landing among the devastation at the edge of town.
Imagine.
Crawling out from the destruction, a man in town takes out his phone and begins to film the monster tornado. Its roar clearly audible from over a mile away. In less than 2 minutes, the entire northern half of Smithville was completely destroyed, leaving behind a hellish landscape and taking the lives of 16 people.
Wow.
But the tornado is far from finished. At 3:47 p.m., the tornado finally exits Smithville and begins to track through rural forested terrain, growing wider and wider before reaching its peak width of nearly a mile wide, flattening entire forests in its wake. To this day, these images depict some of the worst vegetation damage ever inflicted by a tornado. Darnell Colums, worried about her daughter Camille, the same Camille who recorded the tornado's first moments back in Smithville, steps outside and captures the violent wedge passing just to her west. This image is by far the most iconic image ever captured of the tornado. After crossing the Alabama border, the tornado's track begins to shift more to the east, putting the projected path straight towards the town of Hackleburg, itself obliterated by another EF5 tornado just minutes earlier. However, as the tornado approaches, a miracle seems to take place. The path curves farther to the north, sparing the already devastated town, but now moving dangerously close to rural homes northwest of the town of Hamilton. Running to the back porch of a home, Scott Smith films the tornado as it crosses over Interstate 22, passing dangerously close to his home.
We're watching one go across about a mile from us right here, right now. See debris in our area. Y'all better take cover.
I love how they talk.
Although not as large and powerful as it had once been, the tornado is rapidly regaining both its size and strength and heading directly towards Highway 19. 2 miles to the north along County Road 157, Dave Forster begins filming the tornado as it passes to his south, revealing that within just a couple minutes, the tornado has already morphed back into a large wedge. At the same time the video is being filmed, a large family home along Highway 19 is directly struck and destroyed. 6 people tragically lose their lives in this single house alone as the walls collapse onto them. Racing through the rural areas at nearly 70 miles per hour, the tornado explosively intensifies, regaining its extremely violent core as it crosses and parallels Highway 20. Thousands of trees are completely debarked and flattened, with even the ground beneath them deeply scoured. No match for the violent winds, a collection of manufactured homes, along with vehicles nearby, disappear into the vortex as if they never existed, scattering metal fragments hundreds of yards away into the obliterated forests. Tragically, 51-year-old Rodney Abels is killed when his home is overtaken by the tornado. Moments later, his wife Sheila, who survived the Hackleburg tornado earlier that day, arrives home only to find a bare slab. Continuing to cause incredibly violent damage to trees and rural structures, the tornado remains over mostly forested terrain, avoiding the populated areas north of the town of Hackleburg before beginning to gradually weaken and finally dissipating 2 miles east of Hodges, Alabama, after being on the ground for nearly 40 miles. The tornado had ended, but the destruction had not. All across Mississippi and Alabama, dozens of tornadic supercells in the same volatile atmosphere produce hundreds of strong to violent tornadoes, including 3 other EF5s in the towns of Philadelphia, Hackleburg, and Rainsville, unleashing untold devastation and claiming the lives of 324 people.
Wow.
Back in Smithville, however, the scene was apocalyptic. Those that survived emerged into a barren wasteland with everything around them completely unrecognizable. 23 people lost their lives, while countless others suffered severe, life-altering injuries. The damage, however, was nothing short of incredible. The tornado dug deep trenches into the ground, threw vehicles miles through the air, obliterated entire forests, and completely swept away numerous, well-built structures and granulated them into dust, doing all this while moving at over 60 miles per hour. This combination of incredible damage and rapid forward speed, along with existing in one of the most extreme tornadic environments ever documented, lead many to believe that Smithville is the strongest tornado in recorded history.
That's crazy, bro.
"14 years later, the residents of this small town in northern Mississippi won't soon forget that tragic afternoon on April 27th, 2011.
Me either, man. That's crazy. Sometimes there ain't a lot you can say. It's just wow. You know what I'm saying? It's just breathtaking. But if you enjoyed that, as always, make sure you like and subscribe. And we out, man.